Good afternoon, everyone. We are coming to you today live from Atlanta, Georgia, the headquarters of QASymphony. My name is Jeff Perkins. I am the Chief Marketing Officer of QASymphony, and we want to welcome you to the webinar today. Before I hand it off to our presenter to talk about today's topic, using JIRA for risk-based testing, I'm going to walk through a couple housekeeping items that'll help you get the most out of our webinar experience. First, just some technical notes about this webinar. The audio is delivered through your computer, so you just want to make sure that you either have headphones in or your speakers are turned up. If the audio quality for any reason seems choppy, it is probably due to your internet connection. So if you are kind of far away from your wireless router or you are not plugged in into an Ethernet, that might be a better solution, so you get the best possible audio quality. Myself and the presenter, we are here talking through a phone, so we're on a regular landline for the presentation. So if there's an audio problem, chances are it may be on your end. You're able to customize the webinar experience. You just are able, you go in, you could kind of move around any of the widgets you see there on your screen, so feel free to play around with that. One new feature in this webinar software is that you're actually able to click on the icon in the upper right. You can see it right there. If you click on that icon, you're able to maximize the slide so it takes up the entire screen. So feel free to maximize the size of the presentation if that's how you want to view the webinar. A couple other items before we get started. The webinar will be recorded and available on demand. After the webinar ends, you will get an email with a link to watch the webinar on demand. We'll also post a recap on our blog, and we'll post the slides on SlideShare. So there's plenty of ways to consume the content from the webinar after we're complete. We will be live tweeting during the webinar using the hashtag risk-based testing, so please join us there. If you have a question, you could ask it in the webinar software, or you could ask it on Twitter. We'll take all questions. Again, use that Q&A widget if there's any problems, whether it be technical issues you're having on the webinar or just questions. We're going to take Q&A at the end of the webinar, but if you have a question kind of halfway through, just feel free to throw it right in the Q&A widget. And at the very end of the webinar, we're going to pop up a survey to just gauge how well we did. So please feel free to take that and give us your ratings, and that'll help us improve for future webinars. A couple other notes. Our next webinar that's coming up is going to be on testing metrics. So anyone that works in testing, we're going to be doing a deep dive of a new analytics tool that we're launching next week called QTest Insights 2.0. So if you're interested in test metrics, it'll be a great one to attend. So we actually put a link in the resources widget right in the screen, so you could register for it now, so please feel free to do that. That's going to be on October 4th from 2 to 3 p.m. Eastern Time, so hope you can join us for that. A little bit about QASymphony. We are an enterprise testing platform. We're the #1 enterprise testing platform for JIRA, actually, which is why we're doing this webinar. And we cover everything from test management, exploratory testing, analytics, test first methodologies, and more. So if you're interested, visit our website. You can take a free trial of our software. We will be at Atlassian Summit. So since this is a JIRA webinar, I'm sure some of you that are attending this webinar will be going to Atlassian Summit. We will be there. We'll be at booth number 3. So feel free to attend. We actually have a post up on our blog about our presence at the webinar and some of the top sessions, so feel free to check that out, and hope to see you there. And that takes us to our the final point, where I want to introduce our speaker today, who is Mr. Ryan Yackel. Ryan is our Senior Product Engineer here at QASymphony. He serves as the customer voice for all of our products. Ryan comes to us from Macy's, where he managed testing on large enterprise initiatives. He's a certified Scrum Master and holds a BA from Covenant College. He's also a relatively new dad, so he's generally very tired all the time. So with that, I'm going to pass off to Ryan. But before I do, I just want to put in a plug for one more thing. QASymphony has an annual conference. We call it Quality Jam. We just finalized the date this week, so it's going to be on April 18th and 19th in 2017. I know that's a ways ahead of time, but many of you may be doing your 2017 planning right now, so definitely save the date for that. And if you want to submit your email to marketing@QASymphony.com, we're going to pick one person and give you a free ticket to the event. So I hope you can join us for Quality Jam. And without further ado, I'm going to hand it over to Ryan Yackel. Take it away, Ryan.
Hey everyone, glad to be with you again today. Again, I'm Ryan Yackel here at QASymphony. Very excited to talk about kind of one, risk-based testing, but then also how to incorporate that if you're going to be using JIRA, and how to actually get the most out of the different concepts of using risk-based testing as opposed to something that's more like the lines of traditional testing or traditional test strategies that we've seen prior. And then the last part we're really going to talk about is I'll take all this that we're doing around risk-based testing, some of the types of that, and we'll talk about JIRA. Then we'll bring that into a use case. I'll actually use one of our products just real quickly to show you, but you can use it if you're not using any of our products as well. And then we'll kind of end out with some Q&A and some recommended add-ons to try in the JIRA marketplace. But we really want to start out today is a typical thing that we see a lot of people struggle with on a day-to-day or even a weekly basis or a monthly basis, which is, on average, how often do you guys think, and for you all on the line here, how often do you think that your testing gets cut from a release-to-release basis? So you should see a pop-up for a poll to actually take there. You've got some options from 0 to 10 all the way up to 50 plus, but again, we hear this all the time about I always have to cut my testing during release, and we'd love to get some feedback on a percentage-wise what you all kind of see as an average. So we'll give you a few minutes to fill that out, or a few seconds rather. And as the results are coming in, it's pretty even across the board here. But the big thing to kind of keep in mind is that from 10 to 20 and from 20 to 30, that's roughly around half of you that are saying that, yeah, almost 30% or at least 20% of my testing has to get cut every release. So what that really tells us, and as the results keep coming in, we'll see kind of what the overall result is. What comes in is, one, we're not seeing a lot of people saying that, yeah, under 10%, that's really not that big of a deal. If we had a lot of people saying that it was under 10%, this graph really wouldn't be much to really go off of. But anywhere between 10 to 30%, that's going to be a big deal when it comes to testing. And that really comes into, okay, well, because of this, we're realizing that testing is a risky business. If you're always having to cut a large percentage of your testing, that is a risky business to be in. It's risky because, one, you're not able to test everything you want to do, and you're not able to focus on the areas you may want to focus on. And usually a conversation will happen, and it puts a lot of pressure on the test teams. And usually conversations will go something like this. Somebody will ask a QA director, or even this may be even internal struggles as well. If you're talking with your QA team, you may be a QA manager. It's okay, what's our plan to test X amount of new requirements? And the response could be, well, I guess I could create X tests multiplied by 100 configurations. And another thing could be, what's the plan to test this one requirement? However, this one requirement actually affects all 50 of our applications. Well, the same thing, it's kind of a hesitant type of thing. Well, I guess I could create 1,000 tests and multiply those by 50 configurations if I needed to, right? There's always that hesitancy to say, I guess I could do that. However, logically and realistically, we don't really have time to actually test. We did a recent poll from our past webinar, and one of the main things we asked teams was, what's the biggest challenge in your organization? And by far, we had not enough time to test was the main issue for test teams. And it's because a lot of times we get this type of mentality, which is, you guys need to test everything. And it's not possible, right? Everyone knows that we can't test every single thing that's available for us. Even if there's a small feature that gets rolled out, there's always going to be issues. There's always going to be times where we're thinking we really need to get a handle on what we need to test and really prioritize the tests that we need to. And we have this pressure on the QA team to say that they need to test everything. There's also an internal pressure that you put on yourself, which is, okay, Well, if I need to test everything, what do I need to test then? You know, can I look to make sure that I have enough resources for this? When should my testing be complete? How do I get my team convinced that we maybe possibly need to do limited type testing? How do I convince my managers even that I can't test everything? And guess what? We're not going to be able to test everything. So how can I convince them in a way that's going to ease their pressure and make sure that we're addressing those high critical areas of our application, knowing that there's not enough time to test? And of course, in the background of your head, you're always thinking, outside of what do I do need to test, I've got deadlines, I've got limited testers, I've got environment availability I need to deal with, I've got to create a lot of data, and all of these factors factor in a huge pressure that's on the QA organizations and the test organizations trying to make sure that they're producing better software and better quality for their end user. And traditionally, this is the way that we've looked at testing, which is, okay, I've got a bunch of requirements that come in, and I've got test cases. So what do I got to do? I've got to take these test cases and clearly start throwing them at particular requirements. So I may have some test cases that may go to the same requirement. I may have some test cases that go directly to another requirement. But as I'm going through and I'm creating these test cases, right, I'm just throwing them at requirements as they're coming in. There's no real priority around which requirements I need to test, which features, what application areas I need to focus on. And so what risk-based testing does is says, okay, well, let's take a priority and risk-based approach to this, knowing that all these tests aren't going to be ran anyway, even if we align them with all of the requirements that we have coming in. I don't know if you all have done this, but I've done this before, where I've created a bunch of test cases when I was previously working at QA departments, and the pressure was so much on, yeah, you need to create a bunch of test cases for requirements coverage, that, yeah, I created all these test cases and aligned them, but I never even got to running them. So I spent all this time actually creating test cases and aligning those with coverage that never got verified if they actually covered that requirement anyway. So what risk-based testing does is it says, okay, well, we've got these test cases, and we've got these requirements or risks or application areas that we need to test, right? So instead of just taking them one by one and start aligning them with tests, let's go ahead and build out a quadrant that shows which priorities we need to really focus on. You see in the left corner there, you've got a square box. You've got reds, you've got greens, you've got purples, you've got yellows, and we'll kind of go into this, but the concept is you would then say, okay, for these high priority areas, I'm going to create and focus my testing on these areas, and guess what? If I don't have time to test out those non-priority areas, those non-high risk areas of my application, I'm not going to worry about actually doing the tests for that. But what I will have for our management team is a nice strategy to actually show them, yeah, we didn't test everything. It's impossible to test everything in the first place, but we focused the majority of our efforts on the high-risk areas that we believed in so that we can give the best quality out of this particular release. So that introduced, okay, well, let's get into talking about risk-based testing and how do we actually do it. First, we need to define actually what risk is. And we have a definition here, but risk is a problem or a situation that has not happened yet, and it may never happen in the future. It's a possible issue or a problem that may occur. So, for example, if there is 0% chance that something is going to happen, then it's not a risk. If there is a 100% chance that something is going to happen, then it's not a risk because it's a certainty. So it's an issue. It's an actual problem. We have to deal with it, right? But from a definitional standpoint, we think about this. We take risk, and it's usually defined by damage or impact, but it's damage times the frequency that something is going to happen, or impact times the probability that something is going to happen. If any of you all have kind of watched The Office, you'll know that Michael Scott is one of the worst basketball players in The Office, and he thinks he's really good, but one of the problems with Michael Scott is that every time he gets the ball, he has a tendency to shoot a three-point shot, even though he can't actually shoot a three-point shot. So if we were to think about how do we assess if we're going to have Michael Scott on our basketball team, one, you'd look at the impact that he would have. So every time he gets the ball, he tries to shoot a three-point shot. If he misses a three-point shot every time, he not only gives up 1 point, but not just 2 points, but 3 points that could have been gained and just given the ball back to the other team. And how often does he do this? Well, every time Michael Scott gets the ball, he'll shoot a 3-point shot every single time he gets the ball. So the impact on that 3-point shot at a frequency of every single time is a extremely high risk for us to actually have them on our basketball team. And it's kind of an example that I would also say for myself as well. I would actually be a very low-risk person to be on your basketball team because guess what? I actually am terrible at basketball. I know I'm really bad at basketball. So if you were to pick me on your team, you'd probably be playing with 4 people and not 5. But you have a low risk of me giving the ball away a lot of times because I'm just going to stay away from the ball regardless. So there's 2 types of risk or analysis that we can think about. And these there's more than this, but by and large, there's probably 2 that are most common across the industry. And one of them is statistical risk analysis. And that was the graph I had on the previous slide, which is you have a 4-box, and with this 4-box, you weight out the frequency that something's going to happen along with the impact, and you start measuring out, is this going to be a P1, P2, P3, P4 type of risk that's within our that's within the features that we're going to test. So it's a lot of metrics driven, it's a lot of color coding, and you've got, for a general example, you've actually got a way to actually slot those risks into a graphical representation that helps out in understanding that particular risk. However, there's another way to do it, and it's called heuristic risk analysis. And what that is, it's considering more of the possibilities and being more interested in aspects of a problem rather than thinking about how can we use metrics to categorize a particular interest for that. The heuristic model also takes prioritizes this list of risks rather than focusing so much on where to slot this risk on that 4-box that's above. So it's more of a thinking methodology, more of a listing methodology, rather than a metrics-driven methodology. We're going to go over both of these, and I'm going to show you how to use both of those in JIRA, also with some add-ons towards later in the presentation. So with statistical risk analysis, what you're doing is you've got the 2 areas we talked about earlier, which are impact and the probability of the failure. And you would categorize those from 1 to 5 in both of these categories, from marginal impact all the way to critical impact. And the impact in the statistical risk analysis is really based off of how it's going to affect the business. What is the impact on the business? You'll notice that from a marginal impact standpoint of 1, it's just a cosmetic error. It may be something that, yeah, you know what, if this feature doesn't go into production, or if it goes into production incorrectly, it just may look weird, but it's not really going to affect your overall business. Whereas you go to a critical 5 impact, you'll see that it's actually resulting in a loss of revenue for the company. So from 1 to 5, you're looking at the whole gamut of, is this affecting our bottom line as a business, or is it something that is purely maybe a nuisance to the customer, but it's not going to affect a particular loss according to the business. The second category is probability of failure, and this really gets into talking about the complexity of the code. So lower the complexity of the code, how marginal it's going to be. The more complex it's going to be, the more architectural type issues that's going to be happening there. That's going to cause problems. It's going to have more of a critical probability of failure on the scales from 1 to 5. And an example of this I think a lot about is if you're ever in testing a database move. I was a part of that when I was back at Macy's Systems and Technology, and that was one of the hardest things that we were actually, I actually struggled with, or I actually had anxiety about, which was an extremely complex system, and it also had to deal with a centralized balancing system that we're actually moving over into. So basically, the critical impact of that was high in the impact area and also in the failure area when we actually tested that particular database shift. So combined with these, what you then do is you can say, okay, if we multiply the points of failure times the points of the impact, what will happen is you'll probably end up in a particular quadrant. And in that particular quadrant, that's where you should then focus on for those particular tests that you need to align with. So if it's a P1, it's something that has to be tested right away, and it's something that would be great for a smoke test later on. If it is something that you know you're going to be running over and over and over again, or it was an issue that happened previously in the past, and you're going to be using that as a smoke test going forward, you might as well go ahead and start automating that particular test case. And as you go down here, you can even get to a P4 where there's really no impacts at all, and it may not even need to be tested. So saying something like it may need to be tested could sound scary, but again, getting back to those percentages that we had earlier in the particular surveys, everyone has basically said that they cut out testing in their organization. So hopefully you're cutting out P4s and not P1s when it comes to the release testing. The second part, or second type of risk-based testing, is more of a heuristic model, and this is by Ken Kainer and James Bach. They adhere to more of a thinking model, more of a listing model, more of a let's get this high visibility out into our knowledge base so everyone understands and can adapt to the risks that they're seeing in production. And what they do is they have two methods. It's an inside-out approach and an outside-in. With the inside-out approach, the first thing you want to do, as they say, is you want to go and grab a developer and have them whiteboard out exactly how the application is going to work. And then what you do is you just bug them like crazy and ask them what can go wrong here and here and here and here, right? So it's a never-ending, almost like the child who keeps asking why to his parents. You're doing that to the developer, not in a way to annoy the developer. What you're trying to assess is the vulnerabilities, the threats, and also the victims of all of these threats across these different areas of your application. So what happened is, if they're describing you, hey, this is how the process will work, you could say, well, what happens if we remove this process? What happens if I were to click here versus clicking there? What if I use this type of data? Would it change the database in any way? If I remove this process, can the system actually still occur if we miss out on some regression in this application area that we didn't test? Is that something we can deal with? And then also, you're telling me that there's like there's one screen here I can go to. Well, I'm actually seeing that I can go to like 3 different screens. So what you're doing is, as they're actually diagramming out what's going on, you're asking questions, you're throwing in scenarios that could occur, and what that's doing is bringing out risk, it's bringing out problems, and it's identifying risk with the particular application areas that you're in. If you're in testing and you're actually talking with a ton of people that actually like to use the word theoretically, that is probably the most risky language you can use when talking to a tester. Always be aware of somebody says, theoretically this should happen, theoretically this should work, right? That should automatically trigger alarms in your head because, one, it's not giving you a whole lot of confidence that what they're describing is an accurate process within the business application. The other way to do this risk analysis in a heuristic way is to look outside in. And so this is not really going into, look from the application out. It's saying, okay, I'm going to create a bunch of risks that I think of, and then I'm going to align them with all my different application areas of something that could happen. So, for example, what happens if something new is incorporated as a part of this requirement change? What happens if there's a downstream dependency when I do this, or an upstream dependency when I do that? So what you're doing is you're looking at a list of risks of things that could happen. Another one in here is, I didn't really list, is that there was an issue in the application previously. So if you're talking, right, you're talking with experts, you're talking with people, usually what happens is they'll tell stories about, well, I remember back in 2008 when we did this. And what occurred is that what they're saying is they're identifying a risk that actually happened back in, whatever time they were a part of the organization, and you can take that and say, okay, well, I'm going to make another list of the risks that are actually going on. So with those lists of risks that you have, what you can then do is put them in more of categories for risk heuristics. So for example, I've got in this component risk matrix, you see I don't really have a bunch of points here. I'm not calculating anything to produce a P or a 4 or a P4 or a P5 or a P3, right? What I'm doing is I'm saying, okay, these are the components we just talked about. Here are the heuristics of that particular component, and the component may align with a requirement or may align with a user story, right? And out of that conversation, I'm aligning these heuristics with a particular risk score. So instead of saying it's a P4 or a P3, I'm saying, well, it's actually a normal risk, or it's a low risk, or it's a high risk. I'm doing that in a way so that I can, one, not necessarily being constrained to that point system, but what it also does is in this risk heuristics, what it's doing is it's letting people know what's going on. Like, for example, our manifest application, it's a legacy application, and it just changed. Okay, the point of sale system, it's a legacy application, there was no change. Okay, what does that mean? Well, it looks like there's no risk depending on the types of applications they are. But for example, the GUI that we're about to launch is brand new, it's complex, we're having a third-party consultant do it, and it's a critical area of the application because we just moved from having people enter in and scan their orders and it, through a green screen terminal application. What we're doing now is we have a whole brand new Angular application that's all web-based and nobody knows even how to use it, right? So of all the things that are going on in this particular release, I'm going to focus my testing on the GUI area, even though I've got requirements that are touching the point of sale system and the manifest system. I want to make sure out of these risk heuristics I'm figuring out what areas I actually need to focus on. So what then occurs is you've got, out of either choosing both of these methods, you've got a point system you can deal with, and again, I'll go through both of these, but you've got a point system you can deal with, and you've got more of a list system that you can deal with. Before I start talking about kind of a plan of attack, what we have seen in other organizations is that as they are running their tests against the particular areas of the application, instead of having necessarily a dashboard of a sprint burn down chart or whatever, what they have is actually a heat map that shows here are all the lists of the risks that we're seeing in this release. Be aware of these risks as you're going through testing, so if you need to change, you can change the priority of the test you're going to be doing. So with JIRA, you can do that through the heat map example by keying off of a certain value there. That's one option you can do with JIRA. So quick side note there, but let's get back to talking about, now that you've identified the risk, what's your plan of attack? Well, your plan of attack then is to start prioritizing the test based off of that risk analysis. So I've got that army of tests that I may have, right? They're going to be aligned first with, okay, I've got a priority I need to test against. Then as I go in planning, I'm only going to be creating high value, high priority tests first, so that when I go through each one of these tests in an execution phase, what I'm going to then do is move on to the next priority 2, priority 3 of the tests that I need to occur. Now, all along, what's happening is that your window, your time frame is shrinking, right? We talked about this earlier. Your deadline for testing isn't really changing. You're always going to be struggling for times to test. So from green to yellow to red, excuse me, you're going to get to an issue where you're not going to be able to test those P4 or P5 test scripts that you may have created. And again, these test scripts could have been regression test scripts that you may haven't had, maybe have not had time to do. Maybe they're not automated yet, so that you haven't had time to do that either. But what can we then do if we get to this point? We've got a little bit of time left. We know we're not going to be able to get rid of the P4 and P5. Well, what we suggest then is to incorporate an exploratory testing method at the end of that particular release. Now, exploratory testing can be done through the entire release, right? But what you're able to do is say, okay, with an exploratory testing method, I know I didn't get to running the set of tests or the scripts that I had already pre-planned out. However, I know my testers are subject matter experts. I can at least have some coverage in the particular areas I need to test, in the risky areas I need to test, even though we've covered all the critical areas. Let's have an exploratory testing, let's do a couple session or charters towards the end of the release so that we can also convey to management, yeah, we did some sort of testing towards the end there, but we got the high priority, high critical areas of the application out of the way as well. And again, before we get into talking about kind of how to do this inside of JIRA, the goal, right, is that, as we're getting back to this, is that the goal should be a combination of the cost of the failure of the defect with the cost of the testing that you're doing, but with a high level or a high degree of confidence of the assurance of the quality that you're going to do. So you're not going to risk a ton of failure in the testing. You're going to make sure you're monitoring the testing. You're not going to spend effort on low-value tests as well, just because they're quick wins or they're easy things to do. To say you've got some tests, checking off, you're going to focus all of that testing on the high-risk areas of that application. So a quick question here is, before we get to talking about JIRA, is who is using JIRA on this webinar? Are you using JIRA, yes or no? Some of you all may be using JIRA, you've been using it for a long time. Some of you may have some plugins inside of JIRA that you're using. Well, this next half of the webinar is going to be talking about how I structured and actually built out the testing that's actually going on, or the risk that's actually going on. And I'll also give some examples of, I was doing this kind of in a manual fashion, so you can have some other ways to do it with certain add-ons. So let's go ahead and move over here. So we've got, for the results here, we've got around 80% of people are actually using JIRA, so that's great. So everyone that's using JIRA should have an idea of JIRA. We don't need to go into that at all. The one thing I will say about JIRA is that it can be used for all sorts of things, right? So you can have software development inside of that. You can use it for risk management. Our marketing team has used it for go-to-market strategies in the past. I use it for personal task board management as well. And some people just use it simply as an issue tracking. So JIRA can be configured and can be flexible enough to where you can actually do what I'm about to show you, either through a manual fashion or through the plugins that will help out you analyze risk and then incorporate the testing that needs to happen. So the first option that you have when you're going through and thinking about how do I track risk is that one is you can create a brand new risk issue inside of JIRA. Now, I have this as an example. I actually am not recommending this option one. The reason is because I would actually like to show you a way to associate risk on the issues that your software development team are actually more akin to. So for example, if you're using JIRA, you're probably using user stories, epics, tasks, and bugs for the most part. And to incorporate a new risk issue, there's going to be a lot of overhead possibly to actually train people on this particular risk issue. So although you could create a risk issue inside of JIRA and track it that way, what I'm suggesting is actually option two, which is to create custom fields on the actual issues that you are testing against. So the first way from a statistical standpoint is to say, okay, I want to add in the probability of failure, the impact of that statistical failure, and then also a combination of the analysis that's actually going on. So I actually have the high risk of probability of the failure times the impact of the actual issue will correlate to a risk analysis of 25 points. The other way is to use the heuristic model and create on JIRA issues. And what you're doing with that is you're creating a list of heuristics that are in a multi-select field. You could also use a label field. And out of the ones that you're selecting, what then occurs is that will drive whether or not that risk analysis is higher, lower, normal, or medium. And the benefit of this is you could have different field tabs if you're going to use the statistical risk analysis or the heuristic risk analysis, and it can be totally separate from the field tab that mostly common people actually go through and label on their JIRA issue. So I would actually recommend this model because one, you can keep your same JIRA issues, you can add a new tab to the particular field that you're going to be on, and then when you actually go start tracking this against the issues inside of JIRA, then you're able to track that as well in grid formats or in a Scrum board format, which I'll show you here right now. So with the issue search analysis, right, what I did was I created a issue search analysis filter here. What I did was, you can see, I combined all my statistical fields into one area. So I've got the impact, the probability, and then the risk analysis that is going to be dedicated with that statistical analysis. And then I've also got it side by side with the heuristic features as well. So whether or not I'm labeling it high or low or medium, and then also whether I am, what field types I'm using or what risk heuristics I'm actually using for that. The other thing I'm also doing is I'm sandwiching those in between a common field that you can use for both ways of doing this, which is the components field. And usually when people use the components field, it's usually for the application area that I'm actually testing against. So in doing this, what you're then able to do with JIRA is look and say, okay, for these particular components, right, if I want to search and click and say, for the GUI component, what are all the risk analysis, both in points, but both in the heuristic analysis, so that I can make sure and highlight to my team that we're labeling all of these issues. As you can see here, we've got three issues right now that are in the component of GUI. One's higher, one's high, and one's low, and it's all based off of the analysis that we've done either from a heuristic standpoint or a statistical standpoint. The next way to do that would be to then say, okay, well, if I don't want to look at it and analyze it on the particular issue search fields, what I can then do is say, okay, from a board analysis perspective, I want to, excuse me, I want to, one, create some quick filters on the boards that will, one, I can flip between statistical and also heuristic. So you can see here up on the quick filter section, I've got a JQL that says, give me all my risky issues. If I click on this, it's going to give me all my issues that I've labeled to have a risk analysis that's greater or equal to 25. Based off of the point values we have, 25 is the maximum we can go up to for multiplying those. And then from a heuristic standpoint, I'm saying, give me all of my particular JIRA issues that have a higher, high, or normal, and then I want to order those by a particular priority. And then on the right side, I've configured JIRA to say, okay, also in this particular board view, I want to display in that quick view, I want you to display the risk analysis also with the heuristic analysis, so I can quickly compare these as I'm going through and visualizing the tests or the JIRA issues that I would need to test against. So once that has been set, once you've said, okay, I've got my custom field set up, I'm labeling these things, then what you can do is categorize your risks for particular tests and organize those risks for tests. And so if you all are using, somebody's using Excel in this webinar, using another test case management solution, what you can do is you can organize those risks and pull risks over and organize those in a way that says, okay, for this particular sprint, for sprint 2, as we're seeing here, I've got all the issues I've listed out, and I've organized them automatically into a hierarchy that shows me higher, high, normal, lower, and low. And I'm using the heuristic model here, not really a point system here. But what I'm doing is I'm quickly pulling over issues to say, okay, I've identified the high-risk areas. These are the issues we need to actually focus on for testing first, and then we can go down from higher to low to actually start planning out our tests. So once those are actually seen, you can look at the different impacts as well within that JIRA issue. Once those are particularly set, then the next point would be to say, okay, I want to map my high priority test with high priority risk. And now this is different from saying I want to just test everything that's high priority, because what you need to be doing is it's a high priority, it's a high priority. So I've got high priority tests that are aligned with my high risk items, and I'm going to align those with those for testing inside of JIRA. But what I'm not going to do is fill in a bunch of maybe trivial or low value tests against my high priority risks, right? I want to be able to say, as we talked about earlier, back at that graph I showed you previously, or the slide I showed you previously, we want to be able to say, okay, I've got a set of tests that I'm going to be testing against, and what I want to be able to do is have a plan of attack from P1 all the way to P4 for my test, so that if I run out of time, I know that I've tested my high priority tests against my high priority issues that we're going against. So we've got our tests, we've mapped those, we can kind of see the kind of similarities between what other requirements we have linked to these test cases, and then what we want to do is then structure our tests in a way that's also representative, if I go back here, representative of the particular priority areas in the testing that we're doing. So I actually have a tree view set up here, maybe a little hard to see, but what we're doing is we've got different areas within our tree structure that we've got, and again, this could be in Sheets with Excel or another TCM. What we're doing is we're saying, okay, for this sprint, we've got these 4 cycles, P1 through P4, and in those P1 to P4, what I've done is I've said, give me all of my test cases that are high priority, which I've linked to my high priority issues that are inside of JIRA. So then that way, when I'm going through the list or order of the tests that I need to, as I'm going through and I'm tracking the issues that are occurring, I can say, okay, I've got through, if I get to the P1 section or the low priority section at the very end, even if I ever executed them, I can have confidence that I did actually do the testing that occurred and I needed to, at least from those other priority sets of tests. So I'm in a good assurance that what I'm testing and what I'm about to release to production has got rid of those high priority defects or high critical areas. So with that is just a quick use case of doing that. Now, what I was doing previously was kind of showing you in a way that say, okay, here are all the fields you can fill out, and then inside of JIRA you can do lots of searching on those JIRA issues. You can visualize them on a board. But one of the cool add-ons that's in the marketplace is something called Risk Register. And what it does is it does all the complexity that I was talking about earlier. It does it automatically for you. So what you can do is actually set up a probability and impact matrix that has color coding. It's got particular issues there. It's got particular severities attached to these. And if you if you move from the first diagram to the right diagram, you'll also notice is that when we in JIRA through this add-on, if you establish that a particular issue inside of JIRA is low or high, it's going to automatically put that into that risk matrix category. So that at any point in time, I can actually go to this risk register here and visualize every single issue that I have based off of the probability of failure and also the impact of that failure if it were to occur. And then the last section down below is it's showing you that out of this, you're also going to get a clean view on the key issue ID, the summary of that, and then the status of the risk, what is actually being done, if you're triaging it, if you're analyzing it, and then a particular exposure rate to that, and then how to actually mitigate that risk. So it's a great way to visualize all of those risks, and it does it pretty much automatically for you. If you need to change the color schemes, if you need to change kind of the numbers around what's likely and not likely, you can do that all through Risk Register. The other plugin that I had was called Visualizer for JIRA, and this one's really cool. It's almost like if you all have gone to or seen the movie Minority Report. I know that when Tom Cruise is like up on the screen, he's using his fingers, he's like throwing stuff around, he's like pulling things together and pushing them away. That's kind of what this product does. It's hard to show this on a slide, but you can, if this were live right now, you'd actually see these items that are in these different quadrants. They'd actually be slightly moving. And what you can do with that is you can, with this visualizer, is you can set an X and a Y axis. And in this case, I have the risk analysis is on the X axis, which is going from high all the way from high to normal to low to lower. And then on the Y axis, I've got the components that we talked about earlier. So I can visually see, okay, for the GUI, I've got two main issues in high or higher. For all the other issues, actually, they don't have no component to actually align with those issues. For the payment validation component, I've got 2 that are in high. So it's a great way to quickly move stuff around and visualize it in a different way. You're not going to get the color schemes and the true risk register type field that I showed you previously, but it's a really cool tool, and even if we're just like playing around with it, it's a great way to talk about issues, talk about things, and also move them around to visualize them in different ways that you may have not thought of. And then the last plugin that I will talk about is actually more so 2 plugins here. It's JIRA Miscellaneous Custom Fields, and it's Script Runner for JIRA. And as I talked about earlier, when I was actually going through and I was entering in these value fields, right, I was putting these values into particular JIRA issues so I could then visualize and manage that particular, the particular risk that was a part of that issue in JIRA. I was doing all that manually, but what these tools allow you to do is actually automate that and have calculated fields on top of that. So, for example, if I wanted to create and for Script Runner, it's actually done in Groovy, but it's basically being able to say, okay, I want to automatically calculate the probability times the impact and auto-populate the risk analysis field right away. So that I don't have to do manual manipulation. It's always going to be up to date. And the same thing goes on with the JIRA Miscellaneous Custom Fields as well. And these tools go far and beyond just a simple analysis of entering and slotting in points to get a particular result. They do a lot of workflow automation for you is great to even look at, even if you're not even looking at it for this risk-based type testing approach. It's great to highlight for your JIRA admin users for them to take a look at. So as we're wrapping up here, there's some things I want to just say revolving around. Of course, you're always going to get to is, okay, what are the pros and cons, right, for risk-based testing? Well, I'll start with the pros, and we'll kind of go into the cons. The pros are you have the high severity defects are going to be flushed out right away. By and large, right, if you are identifying high-risk areas of the application, the severity of the defects will probably correlate back to the criticalness of the area of the application that you're testing. The low-value test cases, and we addressed this earlier, those are kicked to the curb. So you're not even having to have the anxiety of thinking, oh, well, I got to do these. Or even the temptation for that low-hanging fruit to go ahead and run to say that you had a lot of executions actually going on, right? You can bypass that. They're kicked to the curb. You're not going to have the anxiety of over test planning. The critical areas are flushed out first, and then the last two are the confidence is boosted and your deadline anxiety is removed because you can confidently say that you are done with your testing. Again, we talked about earlier, you can always never be done with testing, but we want to be able to convey to management, yes, we are done with testing. To our ability, we have confidence that we tested the most highly critical areas based off of risk, based off prioritization of everything that we've done. And we've mitigated that to some degree if we didn't get to some of the tests we wanted to plan through an exploratory test methodology at the end of a particular release. And again, this is always going to be hard when we're talking about the cons here. The first one is, I think all of you are going to deal with this. If you're not a manager on the call, if you're an end user, or if you're a tester or an automator or a manual tester, management's going to think that you're lazy, right? They're going to think that you're trying to get out of testing to some degree. And it's all about having to phrase this, right? Everyone knows that you can't test everything, so it's saying, let's put some actual strategy around this to have a good confidence that we're done. With the statistical model, you have the issue with possibly misappropriating or weighting a certain issue. So that's common, is that if you're not having the right people in the room to kind of go through these, you could misalign and say, you know, this is actually a priority 1, but really it should have been a priority 4, and we did a lot of testing in an area that we shouldn't have done. Coordinating the risk identifiers, that is another issue that comes up quite often. And one of the things that we talked about earlier with the heuristic model was you go get a developer, you talk to them, you say, walk me through everything. I actually want to learn about the application. I want to poke holes in it, right? Everyone is busy. Not everyone may be able to give you the old guard story of when things went wrong, when things went bad, to identify future risks in the areas of your application. bringing people together is always a challenge. And then lastly, the impossible could happen, but the impossible could happen if you're not doing a risk-based analysis as well. So there could be I saw a slide from someone the other day, and it was talking about if you're worried about a house attack, a house attack, if you had to wait being attacked by a shark or a dog or a missile, right? That's not going to happen. The dog is probably going to attack you more so than a shark, because a shark can't actually swim or actually walk on land, and you're probably not going to have a rocket fired at you unless you have fireworks going off in your backyard, right? So, but that could happen. Sharks could get feet and they could walk up to you and they could knock on your door, right? So anything is possible, but choosing not to test those crazy impossible scenarios is something that we do day in and day out. So if it does happen, it could be crazy. And lastly, I've got a lot of resources for you. This is going to be up on at the end of the webinar. I did a lot through James Bach. Daniel Guagliardi is an Italian tester that came to talk over in Eclipse Europe. I highly suggest you look at his webinar. He talks a lot about how to use Joomla as well with JIRA. A little bit more of a technical audience in that one. And then we've also listed the add-ons here to take a look at for your future JIRA instances. I know 80% of people are actually using JIRA, so it's going to be great for that.
Great. Thanks, Ryan. Great stuff. A lot of questions came in. I'll get to them. Probably the two most common questions I'll answer first. One, the webinar will be available on demand. You will get a link immediately after the webinar so you can share it with colleagues or watch it back yourself. We will have a recap of this webinar that will be posted to our blog probably next week, so probably early next week. And in our blog post, we always include a link to the slide share, so you'll be able to go in and get all these slides yourself. In the Q&A, I did put a couple of the links to the Sticky Minds article and then the James Bach article, so you can check that out there. So now let's get to some of the more important Q&A. Ryan, risk-based testing for continuous deployment, like twice a day. How do you think about it for that kind of rapid testing?
Yeah. So for a risk-based testing approach for rapid deployment, one of the things that I didn't talk about was really talking about a test-first methodology and a test-first to building scripts that are going to hit on the particular areas of your application that are going to be run day in and day out. For a continuous deployment type of environment, you've built out a heavy dose of regression that is actually hitting those high critical areas in the first place. The other aspect of that is that if you do not have the time to formulate, as I was talking about earlier, more of a, hey, you've got these priorities of tests you're going to be doing, what you'd want to do is from a manual perspective or from a subject matter expert perspective is that you would move up the exploratory testing and actually have exploratory testing pretty much be the all-encompassing manual, at least from the manual side of that particular pipeline that you're doing. Because one, you're not going to have enough time to create more formal analysis around that. But what you're also going to be able to do is get a lot of the testing in from a manual side, from a session-based side, that if you didn't do this and you wouldn't have actual time for the creation and execution of that. So if you, in that scenario, if you have manual testers that are in that continuous delivery pipeline, I would easily move them more towards an exploratory fashion on the manual side. And from the automation side, of course, if you're doing a lot of this test-driven development, you should be hitting those high critical areas in regression right away. If you're not, then maybe you need to slow down just a tad bit to catch up on that particular regression before you start going off and just kind of doing new feature type testing with no a core regression for critical areas, because we've seen that a lot, which is everyone gets really pumped up for CI and CD, and they only start with the new areas of the application that they're testing, and they really forget the legacy applications that they may need to integrate with, and they're not really up to speed on that. So I would make sure that the CI and CD teams are communicating and helping each other out in that regard.
Great, and I want to remind everyone we have a survey that's going to pop up at the end of the webinar, so if you could stick around a couple more minutes when we finish the Q&A, that survey will pop up. We'd love your feedback. Next question. So if a tester, we've got a lot of questions about this. The tester wants to test more.
Yep.
The PM is telling the tester only to test certain things or only test 50%. Tester wants to test 100%. So isn't the risk really on the PM, not on the testing team?
Well, I mean, this is where I would say you're the one that's going to be explaining to the PM kind of what you all are testing, right? One of the things that Rex Black talks about is always letting the curiosity or the issue that the potential risk that you're actually going to be that you're not testing enough or you're not testing a certain area, always help guide that tester. So, for example, if the PM is saying that, yeah, I really only want you to test these areas of the application, well, as a tester, you have a responsibility to tell them, well, you're wrong, because I have an inclination, or I have, if there's alarm bells going off in your head to test another area of the application that you feel is more risky, then you need to tell them that, no, we are actually going to be testing this area of the application for this round of testing or this particular release. Whereas the PM may be, they maybe want to have may want to check off that, yeah, we got done with our testing, and almost diluting the testing or almost encouraging testing to perform in a way that there's no high value there. I would much rather try to convince the PM that, hey, listen, we're putting together a plan. It's going to be a lot more value for you. You may not be able to say you're all green at the end of your release, but you'll have confidence that our test team tested the high critical areas of the application, even though we had, 20% left of the test to actually execute. Because those 20% that you may want us to run at the very beginning, we view those as not as high priority, so we're going to look at running the high priority ones first.
Great. I think this will be the last question we have time for. How do you balance risk in the application versus overall business risk? And how should testers and PMs and developers think about business risk versus just basic application risk?
Yeah, so I think that, and this also gets into talking about project risk, right? So what I didn't talk about was the particular risks that may come about when you are dealing with environmental issues, or you're dealing with data issues that you need, and that kind of factors into the overall testing that you're doing, right? Something that's kind of outside of, hey, this is a critical area of the application that we're looking at, but really we don't even have the tools to actually test the areas that we have because we're so constrained by environment or data issues. When it comes to evaluating the risk of the application versus the business risk, what I would always do is get with the product owner and get with the stakeholder. And usually what the product owner or stakeholder will do is when they're talking about, and the stakeholder being the end user that's talking with that product owner, is that the stakeholder will at times, even though in an agile fashion this is not supposed to occur, but you'll see that the stakeholder will actually communicate a business risk that the product owner is viewing probably as a application risk. And so when they're trying to convey, this is the effect on overall business that we're not going to be able, we're going to lose revenue here if we don't have this, this area of the application completed, then the product owner and the stakeholder really need to communicate that with the testing team so they can analyze that. Great.
Well, Ryan, thank you today. Everybody, thank you for attending the webinar. I hope you'll join webinars in the future and stick around. Just help us out and take the survey. Have a great day, everyone. Bye-bye.